For months, residents living next to Portland's ICE protests say their safety concerns went unanswered. Then suddenly, their building became the centerpiece of a federal lawsuit and a national political narrative. But I went through police data, arrest records, court filings, and social media data, and what I found just doesn't match the story most people have been told. So tonight, I want to slow this down and show you what's actually happening. I'm Ocean. Most of my work is behind the camera, documenting protests, public order, and public records in the Pacific Northwest. But this is the first episode of a new series I'm calling The Tide. And tonight, we're following the story of stories and who gets to write them. It's about power, protest, and who gets to hit pause. The first story is local and still ongoing. It involves Reach Community Development and the low-income building that they own and manage beside the Portland ICE protests. Reach recently filed a federal lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security, claiming that the federal officers there at ICE are recklessly using chemical agents near their building and impacting the residents' lives. So the residents who live there say that's true. There is pepper spray and pepper balls happening, but it's in response to real behavior on the ground that they've been experiencing for months. Residents told me that that lawsuit that Reach filed doesn't really reflect their experience because throughout the months of the summer and fall, there was sort of sustained disruption to their lives and their safety. And Reach only seemed to intervene when they could elevate that into a national political case against the Trump administration. Cindy, one of the residents who you may know, I've interviewed quite a bit. She told me that the people and the residents in the building are angry, at least some of them, and they feel the lawsuit is about public relations and not protection.
Oh, a lot of people in the building are angry.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing it for us.
Another resident told me about being assaulted by a mass crowd while entering the building and the police being unable to identify the attackers, and the case sort of just falling through the cracks. It's pretty common around that area. So I actually went through Portland police data throughout the entire summer from May to September. And between May and June, calls for service around the building actually increased by about 150%. So quite high, really big jump. And arrest records from the summer and fall, they show multiple violent incidents around that area, including some of which involve residents of the Reach building. But despite this, residents told me that Reach never tried to pursue noise enforcement or camp removal or increase police or security presence. There was really no interaction prior to this lawsuit that they filed in federal court. So it does raise some questions. Residents say their safety concerns were basically unanswered throughout that entire disruption, and then it only became urgent once the conflict could be reframed in a narrative as a political case. It's really interesting and something we'll be following. The second story stays local and it's similar. It's about how narratives are built. This is also going to focus on the Portland ICE protests and how those events have been framed nationally, including in a recent NPR piece by This American Life. If you haven't seen it yet or heard it yet, I'll post the link in the comments. Go take a listen. It's pretty interesting to see how narratives are spun up. I'm comparing the framing with what I've documented on the ground, arrest records, observed patterns over time, what people say off script and off record when they are not talking to national media. So over 2025, from the beginning of the protests to the current day, I analyzed all the public police and city data and social media data that sort of tie to the people who were arrested at the events. And it's really surprising what the data revealed. Most of the arrests on the ground involved left-aligned protesters who were generally younger, many in their early to mid-20s, while right-aligned arrests were far less frequent and tended to involve people older, in their late 30s, usually booked on low-level misdemeanors. It's interesting because some of the violence is sort of being pinned on the right, but the data doesn't really match that, so it complicates that narrative for people. The charge severity also skewed left. The most serious cases were like arson, reckless burning, robbery, assault on officers, attempted assaults, and like interference with police activity. That all originated with the left. The right-aligned cases were usually single counts of things like harassment. So the data sort of speaks for itself, and there's like these really important threads that were never untangled by national media. And it's important to the left and the right to understand this. So what the data shows is that a leftist was about 5 times more likely to be arrested at the Portland ICE protests. So that's an important stat in and of itself, and it's something that the left and the right should be digging into. A leftist was about 5 times more likely to receive a violent charge as well. And this is kind of astounding, but they're about 7 times more likely to receive a serious charge, something like a felony or that might have involved violence or direct action against another person. So the timeline really reinforces this. June all the way through October, there were only arrests of leftists. There were really no arrests of the right during that entire period. So the first right-aligned arrest actually appears in October. This was just after Trump had declared Portland war ravaged, if you remember that. And at that point in time, about 44% of the arrests had already happened over the entire year of the protests. So nearly half of the arrests had already happened, and definitely the most severe cases had already happened by the time that the right actually showed up in the arrest record. However, there is a really important split to talk about, which is live streaming. Nearly 60% of right-aligned arrests involved live streamers, but it's unclear the total number of live streamers on the ground at the time. And those arrests usually grew out of verbal confrontations where people were like escalating to the point where there was harassment cases or assault cases. Importantly, none of the leftists were live streamers. Those cases really stem from physical action on the ground. So what this shows is there's sort of 2 ways that people are bringing activism to life at these protests. One was narrative, like ridicule, trolling, sort of capitalizing a bit on the movement that the left was trying to engineer. And then from the left, it was really about physical confrontation and direct action, especially early in the summer. And in the arrest record, you can see the outcome of those 2 movements and those 2 factions. It's worth digging into. So the third story is national, and it's sort of a bit more complicated, so stick with me. But this helps explain how federal authority is currently being exercised and then stopped and paused and moved forward and stopped. So earlier this month on December 8th, About 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case involving the Trump administration trying to challenge birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, if you don't know, it's the idea like a non-US citizen can come to this country, have a child, and that child would automatically become a US citizen. So the case sort of tangentially centers on immigration policy, but it raises really important procedural issues that are having impacts on the ground here in Portland. And that's the use of nationwide injunctions by federal judges. So nationwide injunctions allow a single district court judge to block federal policy beyond their own jurisdiction. You can sort of imagine if a judge was sitting in Portland or in your city and they decided to block some federal policy, it would not just apply to my or your city, but to the entire nation while the litigation continues through the court. So these injunctions have been used a lot in immigration enforcement, executive orders, federal regulations, and not just under Trump. It was during Biden, Obama, Bush. Supporters argue they're necessary to prevent unlawful actions from taking effect before the courts have been able to fully rule on the merits. But critics argue that the practice really extends judicial authority beyond the traditional limits, and it creates inconsistent enforcement of federal policy because you have these starts and stops. So this procedural issue is already affecting things on the ground here in Portland. In late 2025, Trump tried to deploy the National Guard to Portland in response to the unrest at the ICE building, but that was immediately challenged in court by our AG. A federal judge issued an injunction, it blocked the action, and the case is still proceeding through the courts. As a result, there's no National Guard here. In both the national case before the Supreme Court about birthright citizenship and the Portland National Guard case, the same legal mechanism is being involved. That's courts using injunctions to pause or block federal action pending their review. So there's an important signal here. The Supreme Court decisions to take up the birthright citizenship case, it sort of signals that the justices probably care about this, and they may want to clarify how the lower courts can impose those injunctions, if at all, and under what circumstances. That clarification could impact future federal decisions, especially over immigration enforcement, and how quickly court rulings can impact policies nationwide. So together, these three stories sort of point to the same tension that we've seen playing out on the ground in different levels. So first you have residents saying their safety concerns were ignored while the power who was supposed to protect them chased a narrative. In the middle, you've got protest activities being reduced to those narratives by national media that really don't match up with the rest and observation show. And then at the national level, we have major questions about federal authority, enforcement, who gets to decide what power and how power is used, where it flows through our country. None of these cases or these stories really fit into a single headline. It's hard to mash this together. It's a hard story to tell on NPR or your local news. But these are the stories that are shaping what people experience in the public space, in our homes, and how policy is actually enforced. Next up, we'll have an interview with a very special guest. All right, cool. So thank you very much for joining me. For people who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about you, your name, what you do, what kind of work you do as a journalist?
Yeah, my name is Charlie Bouferrache, and I go by Honey Badger Mom on X. And I have been an on the ground and sometimes print journalist and videographer since 2017. Worked at a small local newspaper as a photojournalist, and then expanded to cover what was happening on the West Coast starting in 2017, where there were riots against Trump and far left political violence happening. Some people might suggest there was far right political violence happening. And so I covered that going through 2020 and then started back on the ground in 2021. I took a little break.
So tell me a bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Like, what was your childhood like?
So I'm a fifth generation Oregonian. The family wagon trained here and settled in the area where I live today, in the Willamette Valley. And all my family has stayed here. As soon as I graduated high school, I like moved away, took off, lived kind of a lot of different places when I was young. Settled in Portland in 1990, with the exception of a couple of years I spent in Washington, D.C. But I lived in Portland until 2015. So nearly 25 years in Portland, and saw that city go from kind of a quirky, gritty little sister city to Seattle to at its peak when it was just really the perfect place to raise a family if you wanted to be in the city. And then I moved back to the Valley in 2015, where my family lives, and I live out in the country now. So I've been here ever since. I think I might have lost what the rest of that question.
Well,
Sorry.
tell me about like what kind of childhood did you have? What was the world
Oh,
like when you were growing up?
well, I was a kid of the 70s. So it was perfect. And I grew up maybe 5 miles from where I'm at right now, out in the country. And my mom's side of the family, wagon trained here and were country people and
Oh
loggers.
wow.
My dad's side of the family were Okies, and there was a huge influx of Okies from the 20s, uh, and in the, I think the Dust Bowl area was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, in particular to the town that I live in now, outside of now, again, for the logging industry. So um, I come from country people and hardworking people. Uh, and I typical of a child in the 70s and 80s, you get kicked out of the house in the daytime, in the summer, go outside and play, don't come back until lunch. I mean, we grew up in the summertime. I would, like, for fun, we'd walk down the train tracks and look for pretty rocks.
Mm,
And I mean, this is way outside of town, and go up the creek and grab tadpoles. And I
mm.
was always around a lot of animals. Um, there was the lady who took care of us in the summer when my mom was working. They were pig farmers. So these people were all friends with my dad's family that came out from Oklahoma. So I mean, I grew up surrounded by people with deep connections that were generational and long lasting. And then on my mom's side, you know daughter pine daughter, granddaughter, great granddaughter pioneers. I do think that colors my how I live, how I see the world. It definitely impacts how I live and the values that I have.
So back to what you were saying about the sort of the history of like almost frontier values from your family, like that getting passed down. Do you remember either as a child or a teenager, like when you first became political or sort of realized that you had values that were worth
um
speaking up for?
I was not political in high school. I was a good student. I didn't necessarily get great grades in high school, but up through like 8th grade, I was very studious, like straight A's. And in high school, I was a little more social, cheerleader, active in the student body, leadership, that kind of thing. But I didn't really think about politics until I had graduated. And so this will sound silly to some people, but people who have been a part of this world will understand. I actually ran for in a pageant for Miss Oregon, which was connected to the Miss America pageant. I did that a few times, and you had to be well spoken and able to talk on just about any subject. And I could speak well then, but I wasn't necessarily politically well read. And somebody suggested, well, you should subscribe to the paper and read that every day. I didn't have TV.
Wow.
I read books, and I thought, oh, I don't want to get TV. So they were like, just get a Time magazine or Newsweek and read the newspaper. And I had become a Christian at 18, and that colored my approach to politics because of my pro-life stance from being a Christian. It just was very apparent to me that abortion was wrong. And so I thought, when I registered to vote, well, which party is pro-life? And it was the Republicans. So the combination of those two things is what got me politically interested. And also, so I'm old. This was the era of glasnost and perestroika, which was the start of the opening up of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism. And so all of these things were happening for me at the same time. You know, I was registered to vote, going to college. The Soviet Union was opening up, and that featured it was writ large when I was in high school, because, you know, oh no, we could have a nuclear war with the Soviet Union.
Right.
Reagan was president when I was in high school. And so when the Soviet Union opening up, that was interesting. I lived on the coast, and we started to get Soviet ships coming into port. And I joined an organization as a volunteer that arranged like tourist type things to do for these Soviet citizens when they came off the ships and visited in the ports. And I did that for a couple of years, and it was wild. I mean, so I was starting to read newspapers. I was reading magazines about current events. And then I was also meeting these Soviet citizens and taking them to the grocery store and on picnics and just fun touristy things in Astoria, Oregon.
Oh, wow.
And
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was really, I mean, I thought it was just wild that a few years ago, we couldn't even think of speaking to somebody from the Soviet Union. And here we are hosting them and taking them places. I talk about this occasionally, but I will never forget taking them into Safeway, this group of Soviet sailors. There was a couple women and about 6 men, and we decided we we're going to go on a picnic. And we all drove over with them, several vehicles, got out of the cars, went into the store, and took them in with us. And I looked back at them, and they were just standing there staring at everything. And they said, can you buy this? Like,
Wow.
can you just, like, they had not seen a grocery store that was like that, where it was just full of everything and there was plenty. And that really made an impact on me in terms of what I thought of capitalism and communism. And I gained a lot of Russian, just conversational Russian over that time, because I wanted to talk to these people and understand how they lived. And it was really interesting and fun, but also shocking in the way that they had to live because of politics. I got what I thought was a clear picture of what it must to live under, what it must be like to live under communism. And it wasn't a positive impression that I had.
That is so interesting. It's like a single moment where you're finding spirituality, politics, world politics, and like the Russians up to that point had been like this almost alien species, like a
Mhm.
whole lot of people that we didn't understand, and then they're in front of you.
Yeah.
This
And
is
I
sort
didn't
of
go
like
anywhere. They just were there.
this is sort of like I see a parallel between your work covering extremism
Mm.
because it feels like maybe that was your first introduction to like if I see these people, maybe I'm seeing something different. Do you follow me? Like
Yeah. It
taking the curtain down.
it was a completely, I mean, it just a few years before the thought of getting to meet a Russian. I didn't, I called them all Russians, and it wasn't until I met them that they're like, well, we're Soviets, we're not all Russian. I'm Latvian, I'm
Right.
from Kyrgyzstan, so but the idea of meeting a Russian person was just unfathomable. And another part of that was when I became a Christian, I started listening to talk radio. They had a Christian talk radio station, and there was a show of an American, and I believe he was also Russian pastor who would make trips to the Soviet Union and sneak Bibles in, and then he would bring back stories of what it was like to be a Christian in the Soviet Union and how you had to hide
Mhm.
and how dangerous it was and the persecution. So meeting these people also, um, and knowing about that made that really compelling to me. Like I wanted to understand what it was like to live like that, and did these people agree with their government, and um, how difficult it was. Were any of them Christians? Most of them weren't, but because they just weren't allowed. Uh, and there was always a KGB officer on board each and every ship.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this was also when you were first getting into like journalism, like reading newspapers and magazines. So, and this seeing this Soviet Union sort of opening up a little bit triggered, I think it sounds like that itch to like investigate and dig deeper. Is that when you
Well,
first started to think like that?
so that came before. I've been taking pictures forever, and since I was 10, I just loved taking pictures. And I wanted to be a photojournalist. And for my graduation gift from high school, I got a 35 millimeter film camera, which was
Uh,
like the latest, probably not the fanciest camera, but it was a really nice Minolta 35 millimeter. But that's where I had always been curious about other cultures and people. I think it's not just news events that I was interested in or historical events, it was people that I was
mhm.
interested in. So, and that's never changed. I had a great aunt who went to Berkeley in the 50s and married an Egyptian man and went back to Egypt to live, and lived there until her late 80s, early 90s, when he died, and she returned to the US. And I think she was nearly 100 when she died. But she would come back and we'd hear her stories about what it was like to live in Egypt. And she was married to a very wealthy, politically connected man. And she lived a life that, from our perspective, was pretty luxurious and fascinating. So I just found her fascinating, and I always dreamed of going different places and seeing how other people lived. And I think that's where that started.
So how did you end up in the 2016 era when there was really a lot of violence starting to pop off? and a lot of political tension here in Portland. What
So
led you to that moment?
I was just very tangentially involved with the Tea Party, which started, I'm going to say that was like 2008 or 2010. I can't remember exactly. I just went to some meetings and made some friends with the people who were part of that movement. I had young kids, so for me at the time, getting involved in something like that would have been difficult, but I was very interested in what was happening locally because I lived in Portland. And while it's not the Portland of today, even back then, I thought this is crazy and this is not sustainable how this government is functioning, and it's not good. And I was unusual in that I was a Republican living in Portland, and I never hid that until much later. But so I was paying attention before 2016, but I had moved back here. And one of the reasons why I moved back to my hometown was because I had watched Portland take a steep nosedive in terms of public safety. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like my kids were safe. I had been robbed a couple of times.
Oh,
I'd
wow.
had my mail stolen and my identity stolen. So I just felt like this is probably not going to be a good place to finish raising my kids. So I was still paying attention and had just started doing some photojournalism for a local newspaper here in the valley where I lived when I started hearing about like that Battle of Berkeley that happened in, was it April of 2017? I think I had noticed in Portland late 2016 when they announced Trump was elected, and then there was a pop off of some riots where they broke some windows, and I think they used fireworks, just kind of like riots in the streets in Portland. And that surprised me. And then early that next year, after Trump's inauguration, I noticed there was the beginnings of political violence against people on the right for supporting Trump. And that piqued my interest. Like, what is going on here? I've never seen anything like that. And in May, I believe, of 2017, there was a very significant event that happened on a MAX train in downtown Portland. Trying to remember, I believe it was towards the end of May. This man, Jeremy Christian or Christensen, I think it's Jeremy Christian, who was known to the police and clearly mentally unwell, had got on a MAX train and was harassing and being very racist towards these young Black women who were wearing hijab. And a couple of men stood up and tried to diffuse the situation and put themselves in between. And a third man was on the train that actually was familiar with Jeremy Christian, and his name was Micah, and he was part of the far left, and he was Antifa, and he got into Jeremy's face. Some said that he further provoked a situation that had been sort of quieted, and Jeremy Christian pulled out a knife and slit the throats of all three men who had tried to diffuse the situation, including that Micah. He killed the two men, Ricky Best, and then the other man's name was Taliesin. He had another name. He was a Reed College student or graduate and very peaceful, happy guy. And he died, I believe, immediately, bled out there. And so did Ricky Best, died at the hospital. And they managed to save Micah. I can't remember Micah's last name right now. And somehow, well, it was live streamed. Somebody got on their Facebook Live and started filming the aftermath of that. And I happened to be on Facebook and catch this. And I was like, what is happening here? Why are we just filming a MAX train that's just sitting in a station? And then it came out what had happened. And it was really horrifying. Well, that incident, because I want to talk about that specific incident for a couple of reasons. That Micah that kind of jabbed it, not physically, I don't think, but verbally at the crazy guy with the knife, had run into each other at a political event a week or two before.
Okay.
And that was the Parade of Roses. And that was a parade in Southeast Portland that had been a long running parade that was sponsored by the Multnomah County Republican Party. And after Trump was elected, this was the first year there had been threats against that parade. And the city and the mayor said, well, we can't protect you guys. You're going to, forcing them to cancel. So a whole bunch of people showed up on that day, the left and the right. The right part of that group was a man named Joey Gibson, and who had this group called Patriot Prayer, because he wanted to show that people could still be Trump supporters and they had a place in this city as well. So he decided he was going to show up anyway. And that Jeremy Christian showed up wearing a 76 Spirit of 1776 flag, also talking about Bernie Sanders. He was a Bernie bro. Also, his beliefs were schizophrenic. And so the left said that this man, Jeremy Christian, was part of Patriot Prayer and part of the right, and labeled them far right. So when this incident happened on the Max, and this clearly crazy individual slit the throat of 3 people immediately after they tried to stop him from being very menacing and racist on this train. Sorry, they did that because Joey Gibson and his group, Patriot Prayer, had scheduled a Trump supporting rally in downtown Portland. So they created this narrative that this far right group was ultra violent and Nazis because of this man, Jeremy Christian. And it actually created a national firestorm of media coverage. And it labeled Joey and his group as being far right, white supremacist, because of this nebulous connection between this man who committed to these violent acts, who was mentally unwell because he had been near Joey's group a few weeks before. And that narrative, that became a local media narrative and a national media narrative. And it became they connected it to Trump. They connected it to white supremacy and neo-Nazis, and the media just ran with it. So it went from this small group called Patriot Prayer that was going to have a pro-Trump rally to force the city to protect free speech in Portland, to neo-Nazis, white supremacists were having
killing people on public transit.
Yeah, and going to march in downtown Portland and make everybody feel unsafe. So, and they also said, because the girls were wearing hijab, that these people were Islamophobic and wanted Muslims dead. Now, I didn't mention this, but I was married to my boy's dad, and he was Muslim, and I lived in a Muslim country when I was much younger. And that was and I said my aunt was married to an Egyptian, so I know a little bit about Islam and Islamophobia and radical Islam. That's another one of my interests. And I just thought, I was hearing this narrative and going, none of this sounds true. Like, why is the media lying about all of this? This is really strange. This guy is clearly a crazy person. He's not associated with these people. I didn't know those people yet, the Patriot Prayer people. I knew Multnomah County Republicans. And I'm like, none of this makes sense. And why is the legacy media talking about this? Like, we have neo-Nazis running around the streets of Portland killing people. This is not true. And they wanted to force the cancellation of this event, and they couldn't because Joey Gibson, in a stroke of maybe unplanned genius, scheduled this event to happen in a federal park in downtown Portland. So the state government and the city government could not force the feds to give up the permit for this event. And the feds couldn't deny the permit for this event after they'd already issued it, and it was a free speech event. So this event was going to happen no matter what. And I was like, I am going to go to that event. I've been doing photojournalism for 6 months now. I'm going to take my camera down there. I know that was a very long way of explaining how I arrived on the scene, but that was one of those turning points, I think, in the national narrative around Trump, and it happened in Portland.
There's so many threads there too, like mental illness, all the stuff we're still seeing. So I'm glad you wanted to dig into that event because I do think it encapsulates a lot of what we're still talking about. But tell me more about that event for you. So you went out there to cover it. What was it like?
So I had my camera and I thought, oh, I really want to document this because I know what's happening up there and what the media is saying about it is not true. And I don't think anybody else is going to talk about that this isn't true. It's just going to be the news channels and the Oregonian and whatever. And I reached out to a friend of mine and husband and wife, and they actually happen to know Joey Gibson. I had no idea they knew him. And they're like, the husband volunteered to go down with me. They've been friends of mine for a long time, and he's a photographer too. So I reached out to another friend, Molly Hemingway, and Molly was, I believe, the executive editor of the Federalist at that point in time. And I said, hey, Molly, do you want pictures from this event that's coming up in Portland? And I think she just sent me back one word, yes, in all capital letters. I said, okay, I'll go. I've never done this. Like, I just usually would take notes and turn my pictures in to my local paper. So I didn't know how I was going to do this because I can write. I'm a good academic writer. AP writing is something that's different for me. I had no idea how to do that, and I was a little nervous about it, but I said I'll attempt. And I figured the pictures were going to be more important. Anyway, so I went down with this friend of mine, and I always wear black. Yes. So I unwittingly looked like the far left when I showed up. So, and my friend and I kind of split ways. He was just keeping an eye on me, and I was looking out for him. But I just started talking to people and taking pictures down there. So I'm talking to people in block who are willing to talk to me. Like, I'd never seen people until that day having their face covered. Like, I did interviews, and you could look back at that original article that I did, and I'll send it to you, where you could see I talked to the left and asked questions. And
Were you afraid?
No, I didn't know to be afraid. I mean, I was a little nervous just because I knew there was political violence previously, but it never occurred to me that I should hide my identity, that I should be careful who I'm speaking to. I'm just like, I'm a reporter. I'm going to go down there and take pictures and ask questions. And if they want to talk to me, they'll talk to me. And if they don't, and I was genuinely curious about all of these people. Like, what are they doing? Why are they dressed like this? And this park has one side that nobody could stand across the street from it because there was a building, and I think like the sidewalk is about that wide. So it wasn't even really a sidewalk. So there was a tall building with bushes and kind of no ability to stand on that side. And they had police ringed around the entire park. And then the other park, what's that? Chapman Square is across the street from it. There is, I believe it was a federal building across the street on the east side, Chapman Square on the north side, and then a city building, maybe on, I don't know if it was City Hall on the other side, but I just remember there were, on the west side, it was like the Portland Weirdos and hundreds of them. And in the Chapman Square Park, it was like the Portland Radical Left. I don't even know if I would have known what to call them, but clearly people who were like violent and weird looking, alternative, very scary, not hippie Portland, but like scary far left Portland. And then on the east side were the union people. So they had like garnered a bunch of different unions to come down there, and they had like some union signs. And so, which like SEIU, of course. And then I think there were other unions, and I was like, this is wild. And these people were screaming at about 150, 200 people in this park. And this park is like kind of in a bowl, goes up on a hill and it kind of comes down, and there's a built-in amphitheater. So I interviewed people on the outside, but then I went into the event and it's all these people wearing red, white, and blue and having Trump flags and American flags, completely different, completely different environment. It was much less scary, much less intimidating than what was happening on the outside, which was wild because these people were calling all these nice people inside of the square violent, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, fascists, radicals. And I go in there and there's this really old lady wearing red, white, and blue head to toe. Several of them actually. Guys in cowboy hats, motorcyclists for Trump, bikers for Trump. Joey Gibson, I met him that day, and his sidekick Tiny. They like, I believe they sang the national anthem. Hang on. So they sang like the national anthem. They were playing patriotic music. I saw these guys that were a little bit kitted out, a couple of them, and I asked them who they were. And they said, well, we're Proud Boys. And I said, okay, what's a Proud Boy? And they talked about Venerate the Housewife, that they were, I'm trying to believe, I would remember what they said. They were pro, they said the West is the best. And I'm like, Western civilization? And they're like, yeah. I said, okay, I agree with that. We venerate the housewife. And I was a little bit like, interesting. What does that mean? And what was the other thing he said? Well, he called himself a Western chauvinist. And then he said, we venerate the housewife and some of the other Proud Boy tenants. And he was very dismissive of me, almost like he was irritated that I was asking him questions. And I, of course, did kind of assume that he's probably doesn't like reporters. I fully expected that from people on the right, that they didn't know me and weren't going to trust me. And I didn't really blame them. And there was another Proud Boy there that saw him talking to me. And the first guy I was talking to is a man named Ethan Nordine. And we became friends not long after that. The one that I was like, why is he being kind of rude to me? But he actually went to prison for J6 and was convicted of seditious conspiracy. So
can we pause for a second, Shelly? Before you went there, you already were like curious about the national media narrative around this. And then you get to that rim and you hear the left talking about the inner circle, like what the right is doing, and you're sort of peeling back that narrative. Did you consciously think like, did this at all remind you of the Soviet Union situation when you were younger? Like seeing a group and like peeling back a narrative? Did that ever
no,
come
because
in?
No, because I wasn't really thinking in those terms back then. But I did connect it, but because I figured out that day that there were some actual communists as part of
Mm,
the left
right.
crowd. Like there was a guy that actually had like a Soviet flag. And I was like, wait, are these people communists that are opposing the Trump supporters? So I did connect it, but I
Right.
I wasn't thinking of it that deeply. Like I see what you're saying and I agree it's something very similar. That's just how I approach people.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
interested in them.
well, talk to me like what did you take from the event? I guess let's end that on that event. What was your takeaway that first time being exposed to all that?
I watched the Patriots become very peaceful and happy and in spite of the scariness going on outside. And then when they left, I stayed and covered. The far left took to the streets, burned up a Willamette Week press paper box. Um, they look like they're going to riot and they got kettled, which they can't even do anymore. They got sued. The police got sued for kettling them. And of course, the court sided with
Can you
the.
describe kettling for people who don't?
So kettling is when they box you in and shut off any routes to leave an area, and then you generally get arrested. They just took everybody's ID if they had it and their name and a picture of them. And I escaped kettling because I'd never seen kettling before. I didn't really know it was a thing, but I was like, I don't like where this is going. And my friend and I were like, we're not going to get stuck in there. And they kettled them right next to a huge parking structure. So we ran around the back, went up the stairs to like the top floor, and then ran over and looked over and took pictures from above of the kettling and what was happening. It was just fortuitous that we didn't end up getting kettled ourselves. Um, and then so that finished the day. Major adrenaline rush. I'd never felt anything so electrifying. And then there's the crash that follows that. And I have to drive home and like edit these photos and figure out what I'm going to do with them. And so I like got home and I think I did like 24 photos and I did chunky captions and sent it in to the Federalist and they printed it. It was and put it everywhere.
I want to ask you, I was picking at like why that event happened on the TriMet. Like why was political violence even happening here to begin with?
That was a
Do you,
random act of violence.
right. But it gets spun into a political narrative, and
Yes.
that turns into another cycle of
Yeah,
violence.
it did.
S-
They
So my
created an environment, the media did, and the city government did, saying that neo-Nazis were coming to town.
so is that's what I'm getting to. Is the one party rule part of it? Because
I
Oregon
believe so.
had a couple of decades at that point of one party media, really.
Yeah. I've said often that I believe the media is mostly responsible for the political violence that's happening here in the Northwest because
Hmm.
they were saying irresponsible things. Now, some of that was like alternative media, like the Mercury and Willamette Week, but they were either saying or implying that these people were white supremacists. And they were also echoing the message of the mayor and city councilors saying white supremacy was coming to town. These people were white supremacists. They were dangerous. They were gang members instead of your fellow citizens who happen to like Trump. Uh, and so that narrative was pushed so much. I believed that it was at the root of a lot of this violence. And of course, there were people that were happy the far left was happy to carry out violence if they thought they could get away with it.
So yeah, that same sort of problem is what I think brought you to ICE this year, right? There was a
Mhm.
narrative that wasn't matching what was on the ground. Can you talk to me about that?
So, and I've said this before, I thought I was going to be working with a media organization, and we were supposed to start in April, I think, or May. I can't remember. And we didn't. But I had already started to go out to cover what was happening. And my editor, previous editor, who was going to be part of this project, had said it's going to be all about immigration and it's going to be video. We're going to be video heavy. And they said they wanted to hire me for my coverage of the far left here in the Northwest. So I'm like, perfect. And so we started having, I don't know what you call them, pro-Mexican protests that were happening in Salem and Portland. And this was before ICE had really started uh, being seen on the streets and picking up people. So I started covering that. And Seattle had popped off. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I think I'm going to go up there. Well, I went to Seattle. There was a Christian event that got attacked in Seattle. And then they had a protest against the mayor. So I went up to that and I saw a lot of the people in the far left acting like they had in 2017. And I thought we're going to see the same kind of political violence again as then, only it's going to be around immigration. And I think I'm just going to cover Seattle because they don't know me there anymore and it'll be safer for me to cover that. And I'd heard something was happening in Tukwila. So I went up there and it was wild and violent and they were attacking an DHS facility that housed ICE. Like they attacked the building and it was very violent. And I saw that the cops didn't even show up until like most of the way through. And they showed up, the local cops, just to help provide help on the streets when ICE was leaving the facility with their vans. So help with safe passage. But they didn't show up with all the people that were trying to barricade people into the DHS building and using fireworks. And I mean, it was crazy. And I thought, oh, Seattle is going to be the place. And then it turned out not so much. I'd heard there was an encampment down at ICE in Portland. So when I came back from Seattle, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to go down there. Those people know who I am and it's dangerous, but I'll just go down in the daytime and walk around
At
and
this
see.
point, unlike 2016, you were known as a journalist and you felt a bit intimidated from just showing up without a mask or something and trying to
Well,
film.
in February, I was filming of this year, I was filming a protest at the state capitol and got attacked, harassed, menaced, assaulted. When I say assaulted, a guy stuck a blaring siren right in my ear and put it on full blast. I was deaf in that ear for like 5 days. And that was actually really traumatic. I was surrounded by like five guys. One of them spit on me. Um, One of them was tapping me with this really heavy wooden flagpole. The other guy, and I just was like, and it's because they knew who I was. They were following me throughout the crowd. Alyssa Azar had seen me and decided to body check me. Like they were very physically aggressive. And I thought, I don't really want to be around any of these people because I don't want to give them an opportunity to hurt me. And I did get recognized that day when I went down there to film in broad daylight and did get harassed and called names. I mean, they clearly knew who I was.
And just to set the stage a little bit for people, this was early in the summer when the protests were just starting down there. There was
This was
literally no one else
after
but
this was after, so you remember, like, I don't know, it was June 14th or 18th,
there was a
where they
lot
were
of
really
arrests.
violent and it wasn't covered up. And they like broke glass, almost breached the building. I wasn't there during that. I would have gotten hurt for sure because I wouldn't have gone in block
So it
at
was the
that point.
next week that you showed up?
Yeah, it was the next week. I was up in Seattle when that was happening in Portland.
So would you say was everybody in Black Bloc out there at that point?
there were some people in block when I showed up. But it was daytime, so they had their encampment. So some of them were just hanging out in without their faces covered.
Got it.
And there was a variety of people, not just people in block that were hanging
I
out down
see.
there.
Okay. And it was just you, Katie, Ryan.
That day it was just me. I was by myself.
Oh, wow.
But Katie and I had talked about going at the same time. And so
What was your
uh,
goal?
just to show what was happening, because from what I saw in Seattle and what actually hit the news, it wasn't what actually happened. There were in Seattle, Jonathan Cho was there, Cam Higby, me, Katie Davis Court, and Brandy. Why can't I think of Brandy's last name? You know who I'm talking about.
Cruz.
Brandy Cruz. And Brandy and I were both like in plain clothes. Everybody else was in block.
Uh, so you spent, how long were you reporting at Portland ICE?
So we decided to go in block so that we wouldn't get recognized. And we did that for 3, maybe 4 weeks. And I reported from ICE 3 to 4 times nights a week from June 23rd all the way up until August 3rd when I got assaulted. And it was just me and Katie and Ryan Amaker. And Ryan is not a reporter. Ryan came down there to just kind of heckle them. And when I say heckle, he's very like, I never saw him. They would always accuse him of assaulting people, but I never saw him do that unless he was like defending himself. He was just kind of, he's so huge. He just like, it would take like several of them to bring him down. And he'd show up and do silly things and, you know, just kind of annoy them.
Can you talk about the night you were assaulted, or is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, no, I can talk about that. Yeah, it was a very boring night. And by that point, I had been going as myself, not in block, for weeks. And I wasn't really worried. I said to Katie, I think I might leave. And she's like, yeah, but they're going to do shift change. That tends to be when things happen. And I'm like, all right, I'll wait till shift change. And I had been talking to one of the protesters because I tell them, you know, like I couldn't talk to them very often, but there were a few that would talk to me, and they'd of course say you're making propaganda, and I'm like, I just want to tell the story of whatever's happening down here. And she had told me that ICE was targeting her even when she wasn't doing anything. And I said, you know what? I will watch you and I'll film. And if anything happens, I'll do my best to capture it on film and I'll show it and I'll just say what you told me. And people can make up their own minds what they think about what happened. So I was actually that night, I think maybe it was the night before, I talked to her and I'm like, I'll try and film Grace tonight and see if anything happens. And there's this Mexican woman down there with her husband that always had a Mexican flag. And she hated both Katie and I. We'd never had any kind of interaction with her. She was just vile. Like, she'd call me a bitch just nonstop. Fuck you, bitch, bitch, bitch. Like, it was the weirdest thing. So I avoided her just because I thought she seemed like somebody who wants to fight just to fight. She's very trashy. And shift change happens. They freak out. They try to get in the way of everybody. I'm filming. I actually walked across the street and I'm trying to frame up Grace just in case something happens between DHS, Federal Protective Service, her, ICE, whatever. And if they take her in or whatever, and Grace is right up front. And this Mexican woman that always has the Mexican flag had a big sign that night. And just as things are winding down, she turns around and sees me, and she walks up. She has this massive sign, and she sticks it right in my face, like inches from my face. And I said, nope, we're not going to do that tonight. And I took one hand and I pulled down a corner of it and stepped away. I just wanted to get out from behind the sign because I can't see what's happening, and that's a precursor to an attack. And I pulled it down and away, and she yanks it and it goes flying. And then she jumps me from behind and starts punching me repeatedly in the head, in the neck, in the chest. Just, she got me under my armpit, in my neck, on my head, on the back of my head, and broke my phone off of the cord. There was another woman in block. I didn't know she was a woman then, trying to steal my phone. So I'm stomping on my phone as I'm getting punched, trying to make sure nobody gets that. And I finally just got down on my knees and grabbed my phone. And that's when the woman who was punching me, walked off with her husband. And I grabbed my phone up and I start walking away. And I realized everything has gone crazy. It just turned into an instant melee, like everything. And I get on the phone with 911 and I realize they're not going to come down to ICE, and they're telling me I need to leave the area. And I'm like, I can't, I'm surrounded. She's like, can you leave the area? I'm like, nope, I've got people all around me. And I see the person who tried to steal my phone coming towards me, and they're all in block, like completely face covered. I maybe even glasses, I can't remember, just slits for eyes. And I'm like, you need to get back. You need to get away from me, because I knew they'd already tried to steal my phone. They were in block. She had aggressive body language. And I was like, if you don't get away from me, I'm going to pepper spray you. And I had it in my hand, and I'm like, I mean it. And the woman on 911 is like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm not. Anyway, person takes a step for me, and I just coated her face with pepper spray. And she drops everything she has and runs at me like a linebacker and
Wow.
just took me out of my tennis shoes, knocked me right into that bioswale where all the plants are in the sidewalk. And sorry, my cat's breaking into the office here. And just starts punching me. And then I'm covered in pepper spray and I'm being punched. And there's video. Katie ended up catching the end of that and caught the woman who it was that attacked me the second time. And we knew who both of them were. Katie had identified them within like 12 hours. And so the police knew. They still never have been arrested. And it was implied that it was my fault for
By the
being down
police?
there. Not so much the police as it is
The narrative?
the like the DAs don't want to touch those cases. And the DAs that's a political type of office.
Right.
And I don't even know if the Multnomah County DA has heard about my case, the one that got elected, Vasquez. And because he said he was going to prosecute people like that he wasn't going to stand for political violence. And so I don't know if he just, would have no idea, because my case is not a big deal to any of them. It's a big deal to me.
Right.
And I didn't go back down there for like 3 weeks. I did, but I filmed from a balcony. I wouldn't be on the ground. I'd go in during the daylight hours and go into the building.
And you were assaulted again, right? After that, you were pepper
Yeah.
sprayed. And then
Bear sprayed.
Bear sprayed.
On a live.
And then you wouldn't come down unless you had personal security.
I'm trying to remember. So no, I think I went back. The next night after.
Oh, wow.
Or there might have been a break. I would have to look at my videos, but Katie and I went back. The next time I went back, I don't know if it was the next night or if it was the next weekend, but I went back on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I decided, since I went live that first time when I got attacked about 2 minutes into my live, that I was going to go live and stay live. And there was a particularly, I'm going to say it was a violent night. Katie and I did not get attacked. She had I love this guy that showed up. I don't think I can say what he used to do, but he was a type of law enforcement, previous and retired. And he was very proficient at self-defense, and he kept people away from us, but not completely away from us, because it was so alarming what people were seeing on my live. That was the first time I'd gone live and stayed live, that men started showing up. And it was
So
after Charlie had been assassinated.
let's talk about that. Well, actually, to take a step back, like what does ICE feel like this year compared to the era you covered in 16 to 21 when there were sort of dispersed riots throughout the city?
Um,
You obviously saw violence at ICE this year, but
I
how does
did
it
see
compare?
violence, but I saw what I would consider people who actually understood violence and were good at it previous. I didn't see, except for occasionally, some of these same people down at ICE this year. I would see some of them during direct actions, and you can actually start to recognize people in block. Even if you don't know their name, you're like, oh, I remember that guy. He's violent. He always wears his block like that. Like, some people are just recognizable in their block. And so I'd occasionally see at direct actions some of the more violent actors, some of the people who were actually good at violence, but it was mostly um, a bunch of obnoxious misfit LARPer type people down at ICE. And a lot of different kinds of people. So people that I would call antifa, people I would just call far left, progressives, very liberal people, people from all walks of life that would show up. Some of them I even actually, there's a few that I actually like. I probably would never be friends with them normally, but the fact that I was there with them frequently, you could talk to them
Yeah.
and get to know them a little bit. But
So you mentioned starting to stream as well, for protection in a way,
yeah,
but that also was like the a turning point in this story where we started to see streamers coming out
yeah.
and people. So I guess two questions for you. What was that about? What does that mean? And then is streaming journalism? What is journalism? Like
Mm.
tell me your opinion there.
So I love that the Oregonian did an article about my lawsuit and called me a conservative live streamer. And
Right.
actually, I know the guy that I know Zane. I've known Zane since 2016. That's the reporter at the Oregonian. And I like texted
It's a
him,
little
Zane,
dig.
what the heck? No, I mean, I like Zane. Like, we don't agree politically, but I've never had like a bad, I'm going to call it a working relationship, even though we don't work together with him. I've shared information with him that was important for his stories that I thought that he should know and that he's used. Um, I don't think he likes to think of me as a journalist, but I've made my case to him. Like, he did another article once and named me as a conservative influencer. And I said, dude, I'm a journalist. I need you to change that right now. And they did change it in the online article, but he wrote this latest article and called me a live streamer. He goes, well, it was just covering more, you know, all the things you do. It's just, I was like, dude, I'm not
Really.
a live streamer. I just thought that was
Well,
super weird.
it's really kind of heavy in the era we're in because there is this debate about journalism. Citizen journalists, that's what I'm calling myself.
Yeah.
Um, Candace Owens, there's all the conspiracy theories that are online and like
Mhm.
what what is the balance there for you? Like what is journalism to you?
Okay. Well, so I would say I'm an independent journalist right now, only because I am not working for somebody currently. And I'm not really seeking to work for anybody, but I could probably and I have sold my stuff to people. I wouldn't call myself a citizen journalist anymore, only because I've done this work and I've worked for organizations. If I never had, I'd probably call myself a citizen journalist. And we need citizen journalists because they don't have to answer to an editor who might have an agenda. And we need independent journalists to get things out there that might not be seen otherwise from legacy media.
Do you think there are influencers who call themselves journalists for the
100%.
clout, or I don't know why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
what is that?
absolutely. Um, so a lot of this stuff I'm still trying to figure out for myself. This is a kind of a newer, it's new media. But if you're getting paid by the administration and not disclosing it, and you're calling yourself a journalist, I think that's ethically questionable territory. You could disclose that and let your readers decide. I think it's important to disclose things like that. And some people just want to be influencers, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as we know you're an influencer and you're not trying to position yourself as a journalist.
How much of what we're seeing out there is like politics, and how much is it like social media clout chasing? What's the balance there?
I don't know what the balance is, but I know that what I started seeing at ICE after, and I've said this before, when I live streamed and some big YouTube people made a lot of money on live streaming my live stream on their YouTube channel, and then tipped me a lot of money, which I was very grateful for. That's when we started to see people show up, live streamers to show up to make money.
So
And
there's content out there because of the behavior, I guess.
in my opinion, there is content out there to cover. You could do it as a journalist. I don't feel like what I was doing when I was live streaming was journalism. I saw that as more entertainment, because that's not how I would choose to do journalism. It was difficult I was very nervous, and it was hard not to talk and give my opinion. I mean, I'm sure some of what I did was informational and good for my audience, but I would do it differently if I'd probably do it differently if I could go back and do it again. And I wouldn't say very much like on the lives, but I absolutely was not trying to create content. I was not trying to start fights. And I saw then and did continue to see a lot of people who come down there to create content by being obnoxious, by saying outrageous things, by baiting the left, by baiting the right. They want stuff to film, and just by the nature of how they approach things, they're creating their own news, which is a kind of a news, I guess. But
well, you mentioned earlier, after you were assaulted, after Katie was assaulted, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, you started to see young men coming out. And it did seem like maybe they had some righteous political belief to defend journalism and women.
There was a short period, I'm going to say a week to 10 days after Charlie was assassinated, and it was several days later when Katie and I returned to ICE, and I live streamed that 2 minutes and got assaulted on a live, and Katie filmed the last half of it. So that was after I believe Charlie was assassinated. So that was alarming. And then when I returned shortly after, and I live streamed, and it was violent. And I was saying it would be great if people showed up to help us. That there was a short period of time where it wasn't live streamers showing up. It wasn't guys with their phones in their hand filming. It was just guys showing up. Hey, we saw you on Matt Morse. We just want to come down here and check it out. Are you okay? There were people that came down in particular to protect us and didn't say a word to us, just showed up, didn't film, just stood near us. And that was like amazing to see and shocking and like heartwarming all at the same time. But it was like within 2 weeks, it was people saying they were showing up to protect Katie and I, but they had a full rig system and they were walking around filming stuff. It had nothing to do with us, even though they said they were down there for us. I think it was more like, well, they saw what was happening, so they decided to come down and film for themselves, which fine. They can
Well,
do
what do
that.
you, and now that's kind of where we're at. It's like these sort of social media wars on the left and the right out there. Like it seems like everybody's live streaming and
Yeah.
everybody is making posts about it. Like where are we at? What is this era? Did this exist in the 2016, 2020? No.
No, in fact, I've heard several people who were on the right who were part of activist groups say they would have never allowed anybody like this in their groups. When people showed up to live stream to like make money and like that they would have been kicked out. They would have been told to go away. I wasn't part of that, so I wasn't a live streamer, still kind of not really a live streamer, so I don't know how that was, but that's what I've been told. And right now, what I call it, which is not the nicest thing, I call it slap fights between the right and the left is what's happening down there. And they're just kind of creating this low level violence and yelling and disruption to film.
Just enough for filming.
Yeah.
Do you think any of it's legitimate?
I'm sure that there's some of it that's legitimate, but there's also a lot of it that's just manufactured just because of how they approach things. It's not that they're like, I am going to go down there and start a fight, punch a guy so I can film it. It's more
Right.
that they go down there, I'm in a live stream, and then they're obnoxious with their mouth, or they get physically close to people, like they're antagonizing the situation. So I don't know that they're thinking, I'm going to go create content, but by the way that they approach it, they're creating content to film. Some of them,
I
I'm
was
sure, are purposefully creating content.
I was thinking last night, like it's we're in really deep winter, almost to New Year's, and people are still out there. It's pretty sticky. Like even compared to the 2021, this feels like it might go longer.
Yeah, I'm surprised that people are still out there. And I think it's because the
Social
streamers
media
are out there. So the left is like, we can't just have the right out here because then they win.
and the right is
And the right's like, we are not leaving because the left's going to win. And so,
well, I was gonna say, where do you think this goes? We have 3 more years of Trump,
oh,
and probably deportations are gonna rise. So what is gonna happen?
well, so they took a lot of uh, people out of long time leadership positions. So like people who'd been in leadership positions for a long time at ICE were removed and replaced with border control people. And border control operates under a different set of rules and ethos than ICE does. ICE, and this is me just speaking from the little bit that I know, ICE is more targeted enforcement. They pick up particular people that they stake out. Border Patrol just goes around looking for, generally speaking, they go around looking for people. And I've said this before, but they're referred to as the agro cowboy of federal law enforcement. So they're doing a lot of the work in some of these sanctuary states along with ICE. And so they're operating differently. And I think we're going to see some political violence on the streets in these situations. We'd already seen some very, what I would consider scary situations with far left activists trying to interrupt or stop federal law enforcement officers on the streets in suburbs of the Portland area. So I think we'll see actual violence, scary violence. Somebody, all violence is scary, but like I'm not talking about a fist fight.
You're
Somebody's going
expecting
to
it
get
to
ran
get
over
worse.
with their car, or somebody's going to get shot. Somebody's going to end up dead. And I don't know if it will be ICE or Border Patrol or a civilian or a far left activist or somebody in custody. We've already seen
Right
people in
wing.
custody that were ICE detainees that were shot and killed in Texas. We see state, county, and city governments of the far left ones encouraging citizens tacitly to do some of these more dangerous activist type work. And that's what's scary, how the government is getting involved in this and encouraging it because they hate the current federal administration. And and it's on so many levels. They're suing them federally, the state is suing them, or the city is suing them. And then they have where they're tacitly encouraging individuals to do this kind of thing. And also they're saying, we won't prosecute you. We're not going to arrest you if you interfere with federal law enforcement. And some of the outreach they've done to the National Guard people that might be called up and discouraging them through propaganda campaigns not to take part if they're called up. We saw that with, I was at Mark Kelly and some senators.
Right.
And so I think we're going into a kind of era that we have not seen in a very, very long time that could be very tumultuous and dangerous and violent.
Well, we started the interview where you were saying you sort of just had hope for maybe there being a city that would have room for all its citizens, even if you disagree on politics, and maybe have room for different media and different journalism. But if I'm hearing you right, you're saying you expect Trump is going to escalate and the left-wing local sanctuary cities are going to escalate. Do you have hope for Portland?
Oh, no, none. In fact, they've gone further left with their peacock block, with their socialist city councilors that are a part of this. Mitch Green, Angelita Murillo, like they say they're socialists, they're communists, and they want to tear it all down. So I see it getting worse.
Well, what's the solution? Where do you go from here? What's your role?
There's no solution for this outside of people voting differently, and I don't see that happening.
Will you keep covering this story?
I'll keep covering it for as long as I possibly can. That's one thing when I went on Timcast IRL, Tim mentioned something that kind of actually scared me. And he said he was talking about back during World War II when Jewish people were talking about leaving, and everybody, he said something along the lines of, when you're thinking maybe I should leave, it's probably already too late.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, because they've all left where they were. And I'm like, should I have left Oregon? Like, they left caltrops in my driveway. Like, that is a serious escalation. And I'm still think that it's just surreal to me. And am I going to get targeted by, government officials? And I'm already being sued for defending myself. Like, I don't know. I don't know. It's something I think about a lot. Like, at what point am I done?
What's the personal cost? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge personal cost, and there could be a bigger cost that I just haven't even realized yet. So I don't know. I don't know
They
what I'm
say
gonna do.
the stories that matter usually cost the people telling them. So
I'll tell you what, this story has cost me a lot already, in terms of mental health. I have been off work for a month from this, and I'm just kind of starting to want to cover other things, but I realize I have shut myself off from everything that didn't have to do with this story because I could not handle outside relationships. I mean, like, it just became difficult. I'm going to sound like very touchy-feely. The trauma of doing this work, seeing the violence and being targeted for so long, it's low-level violence, but it was continual, has definitely have an impact. Like I wish I could talk to a counselor about it, because I know that it's impacted how my life, not in a good way. I say I'm traumatized. I am traumatized from it. And I very traumatized from being assaulted and knowing the government will do nothing, even though they know that I didn't cause that to happen and I didn't deserve that. And then when the right has come after me, people who claim they're on the right, because I have been critical of how they act, was also, I mean, like, there were times when it was a little bit overwhelming, and it just made me think, I don't like anybody. I don't like any of you people, nobody. And I have felt very angry about it. And I am not an angry or bitter person. I tended to be more hopeful, and I don't feel like that really anymore. So it's just a lonely place to be a truth teller.
Why do you continue then?
Because when you're a truth teller, it's hard to keep your mouth shut. You know, like when you see an injustice, when you see something that you think people should know this is happening, because if they know, they'll stop it. And it's also a way to feel less alone and less crazy, to talk about it. So, like, I think all the time about moving away and just having a different life, like maybe be a furniture upholsterer or I don't know, anything that is not like this work. Because I don't ask for this controversy. I don't feel like what I'm doing is controversial. I'm just the messenger. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. I'm giving my opinion sometimes. But the narrative, the legacy media created about what happened down at Portland this summer and how it was all false and, you know, it was made up, and they would allude to us, sometimes even naming us. I was just like, what is happening? Like, you guys weren't there. I was there. Why would I make this up? You know, to not be believed and to be a truth teller is very hurtful and frustrating. I don't know, maybe I just want to clear my name at this point. I keep thinking I'm going to be done.
Well, thank you, Charlie, for joining this and talking to us and sharing this story a bit. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking such thoughtful questions. Nobody asks those questions.
Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
So that's what the tide is for, to slow these moments down, pick them apart on the public record, and document for primary source reasons how decisions are made elsewhere that really show up here first. I'll continue reporting on the ground as oceanplot. You'll see interviews, you'll see analysis, but I want to use this format to connect with you, connect with the stories, and connect the stories themselves to make sense of our reality here today. Thanks very much for joining me. I'll see you next week.